Why does an AI agent lose a good method during long-running work? Skills preserve it. OpenAI describes skills as reusable, shareable workflows for specific tasks. A skill can carry a name, instructions, and supporting resources so the next run starts from a useful operating pattern rather than a blank chat. The loss is familiar: you finally get a good research brief, handoff, analysis, or draft, then reconstruct the same context, constraints, and formatting rules next week. The result is inconsistency before the real work even begins. In this video, you will build an AI agent skill template with 7 fields: trigger, inputs, workflow, output contract, guardrails, evidence, and revision note. It is small enough to use and explicit enough to inspect. Before we begin, save the idea that a useful skill does not replace judgment. It removes the avoidable setup work so your judgment can focus on the parts that are genuinely new. Start with a task that keeps returning, not with a document you hope people will read. Look for a repeat that has a recognizable starting signal. For example, a weekly customer summary starts when fresh notes and product data arrive. The skill should describe that trigger, not merely say that it creates summaries. A repeatable task has stable intent, even when the source material changes. If the goal, audience, and success condition are different every time, you still have exploration, not a workflow ready to package. Do not mistake frequent copying for repeatability. A copied prompt may contain a useful sentence, but a skill earns its place when the same decisions, checks, and deliverable shape recur across several real runs. Write the trigger in ordinary language. When a decision-ready update is needed from new evidence, use this skill. That sentence prevents a good workflow from being activated for a nearby but different job. Chapter recap. First, a skill begins with a recurring job, not a generic topic. Second, the trigger should make clear when the workflow applies. Third, one-off exploration can remain a conversation. A skill should fetch the context that changes the decision, not every detail from the last project. Next, list the inputs that change the answer. A source folder, a customer brief, a target audience, a deadline, and an approved vocabulary can matter. Old decorative examples usually do not. Resources work best when they sit beside the step that needs them. A research workflow can point to the source standard during evidence collection and to the delivery template only when the final brief is assembled. Make constraints concrete. Instead of saying be careful, specify what must not be invented, which records are authoritative, which action requires approval, and how uncertainty should be shown to the reviewer. This is also where a skill differs from memory. Memory can remember a preference or prior fact. A skill tells the agent which context to retrieve, how to use it, and what to do when it conflicts. Chapter recap. First, inputs explain what the agent can use. Second, constraints explain what it must protect. Third, references belong beside the step that needs them. The heart of a skill is a small sequence of decisions that a capable teammate could inspect and challenge. Now write the workflow as a short sequence of decisions. Begin with the goal, inspect the inputs, identify missing information, choose a method, create the draft, and verify the promised outcome. Each step needs a reason to exist. If a step only repeats what the previous step already required, remove it. If a step changes the evidence, the choice, or the handoff, make that change visible. Use branches sparingly. A useful branch sounds like this: if the source is incomplete, ask for the missing record and label the draft as provisional. It does not try to predict every imaginable exception. For high-risk claims, demand and evidence move. The agent can cite the record, show a calculation, name an assumption, or ask a human to decide. A confident sentence alone is not a verification step. Chapter recap. First, separate the goal from the method. Second, write branches only where a real choice exists. Third, ask for evidence when a judgment is high risk. A reusable workflow ends with an output another person or agent can check, edit, and continue. A good skill ends with a handoff contract. Define the audience, format, required fields, and the decision the output should support. This lets a reviewer check the result without reverse engineering the original prompt. Include an uncertainty rule. If a source is missing, if two records disagree, or if a decision depends on human preference, the output should surface that condition instead of burying it in fluent language. The final check should match the task. A release note needs factual and link checks. A customer message needs audience and permission checks. A plan needs owners, next steps, and unresolved decisions. This makes skills shareable. Another teammate does not need your private intuition to judge whether the run succeeded. They can inspect the input, the decisions, the output contract, and the evidence. Chapter recap. First, specify the format before execution starts. Second, make unknowns visible instead of hiding them. Third, include a final check that matches the task. Treat a skill as a maintained asset, revise it after failure patterns, not after every passing mood. Do not freeze a skill after its first success. Record the failure pattern that led to a revision, a missing input, a misleading default, a weak output field, or a check that looked reassuring but missed the real error. Keep the unit small. One skill can gather evidence, another can turn evidence into a decision brief, and a third can run a release check. Smaller skills are easier to understand, test, and recombine. Retest after a revision on fresh work. Replaying the exact example that inspired the skill proves only that you preserve the past. A new input reveals whether the instructions carry the right judgment forward. When a skill becomes too long, ask which part is truly shared and which part belongs in a resource, a template, or a separate specialized skill. The goal is reliable guidance, not a monument to every past lesson. Chapter Recap. First, record the failure that justified a revision. Second, keep small skills composable rather than creating one giant prompt. Third, retest the workflow on a fresh task. The practical sequence is simple. Capture a real repeat, name the trigger, bring in the context that changes decisions, write the few steps that matter, define the handoff, and test the result against a fresh case. That is how an AI agent stops replaying your best prompt and starts using a maintained working method. The skill does not make the agent infallible. It makes the work easier to inspect, improve, and reuse. Try the template on one small recurring task this week. Write the trigger in one sentence, attach only the source material that changes a decision, name one check a reviewer can actually perform, and record one uncertainty that the agent must not smooth over. If that version helps a second real run, keep it. If it fails, revise the field that failed instead of adding unrelated instructions everywhere. Follow Tiny Agent. Tiny Agent helps you get better at using AI.